Iran has elected a new president. Many Western media outlets call him a reformer. We'll be asking what that actually means in the post-woman life freedom movement. We'll be speaking with a former U.S. State Department envoy. I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Joining us now to talk more about Iran's new president-elect is Ellie Cohanim. She is an author and was a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism under the Trump administration. Thank you so much, Ellie, for joining us.
Negar, it's really my pleasure to join you.
So the Western media, Ellie, has largely propagated the certain view of Masoud Pezeshkian. You know, I saw a BBC headline that stated that Pezeshkian was providing some hope for young Iranian voters, and he was providing hope to Iranian women. What is your view of Pezeshkian?
Negar, you know what I find astounding about the Western media is how much they have a tendency to buy the Islamic Republic of Iran regime's propaganda hook, line, and sinker. And so in the case of these headlines that you're sharing with me, I think it's a wonderful case study of exactly what I'm referring to. Western media kind of buying this notion that there is such a thing as a reformist within regime officials. Just the very notion of that is regime propaganda. Any honest Iran observer knows that those who stand in opposition to this regime, those who want to actually create reform in Iran, are either unfortunately tortured and murdered at the hands of this regime, or they are sitting in prisons like Evin, which is a prison holding Iranian political dissidents, where the most awful forms of torture are committed against those Iranian political types, the ones who actually want to create reform in Iran. So the Western media just tends to get it all wrong when it comes to Iran. And so I very much reject the notion that Masoud Pezeshkian is any kind of a reformist, and that he is in Iran to change things, even in the slightest.
Let's talk about that and why that is. You know, in last week's episode, we touched on the Iran Influence Network, or on the Iran lobby. What is your knowledge of the Iran Influence Network, and how do you think that played into potentially Pezeshkian's win?
In Iran, the regime is very clear of what the values are that we hold dear in the West, and so they know that the Europeans and the United States generally reject Iranian authoritarianism. They know we reject their human rights abuses. They know that we reject their religious totalitarianism. And so with all of that in mind, and certainly also with the notion that in the U.S. In particular, we're looking at a new presidency under Donald Trump coming into office, I think that the regime was trying to figure out exactly how they can market this new president that was going to come into power in Iran. And so what they realized, very smartly, is that their best move would be to put forward a candidate who they could market as a reformist. And so that's kind of what we saw with Pezeshkian, and we saw it very quickly, because as soon as he was put out among other candidates, and again reminding the audience that the system in Iran is not an open system. The candidates for president are vetted, and 99.9% are rejected. So there's a very small number of people who are actually allowed into the process of running for this office. And so these are people who are regime insiders that the regime has given their stamp of approval. The Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, has given his stamp of approval for anyone who runs for office.
That's a really good point, because I mean, a lot of experts say that this is more of a selection process than it is a real election.
Right, exactly. So it's a selection process, and so early on, we start to see folks that are tied to the regime start to tell Western media, Western think tanks that Masoud Pezeshkian is a reformist. And apparently, folks in the West have bought this line. And so now everybody is lauding the notion that this person is a reformist and he's, won the election in Iran. So all of this has to be taken with a big grain of salt, what happens in Iran, because I agree completely, Negar. I think selection is really the right word for what happened. And so, to your question about the Iran influence operation, which is exactly what it is and what it has been exposed for. Look, what we know as the facts right now is that there are a number of individuals who, some of them were hired in by Robert Malley into the Biden administration, who, due to leaks, have been documented to been closely, perhaps taking orders, but very closely coordinating with Iranian regime officials, their activities in the United States, specifically to sell to the American people notions that would help advance the Iranian nuclear program. So this is what's been documented through these leaks that have been verified by multiple news outlets as being valid. And, Negar, what's interesting is that nobody has disputed the validity and the authenticity of what has been leaked so far. And so now we get to Robert Malley. So he was Joe Biden's political appointee, the special representative for Iran. And he is a former Barack Obama White House official. And interestingly, Malley had gotten fired at some point from Obama campaign, if I remember correctly, because he had conducted some activities that were so beyond the pale, even for Barack Obama, in terms of relationships with Palestinians and Hamas and so forth. That was, if you can imagine, beyond the pale for Barack Obama. He gets fired by Obama, but Joe Biden comes into office and hires him back in. And Malley, of course, had also been on the
and why is that?
negotiating
Why
team.
why did he rehire him? Do you suppose? What is your take on that?
Well, so Malley was on Obama's 2018 nuclear deal negotiating. Not 2018. Sorry, the original JCPOA negotiating team. And the question of why Biden and Blinken brought Malley in, I guess in theory you could say that. I guess in theory you could say that they consider him an expert. What I would posit, though, is that what happened with the Biden administration is that Joe Biden reverted exactly right back to Barack Obama's Iran policies. And so in some ways, you're kind of seeing the band is back together again. What you're seeing is a lot of the same players of the Obama administration came back into office, were hired by Joe Biden, placed by Biden in these political appointments. So that is people like Robert Malley, like John Kerry, who is so close with Javad Zarif, as we know.
And Zarif was a very important player in Pezeshkian's campaign. We suddenly saw this reemergence of him, and some people suspect that he's actually behind the Iran influence network.
Exactly right. Zarif is a very interesting figure in all this. Like you said, Negar, he suddenly reemerges in the picture with Pezeshkian. And Zarif is noted for his close relationship with John Kerry. In fact, there was some information that came out towards the end of the Trump administration where I had the honor of serving, that John Kerry had actually been continuing to have conversations and relationship with Zarif and others in Iran during the Trump administration when he's already out of office and it's not even quite legal in the United States to do so. And what we understood was that Kerry was kind of telling the Iranians to hang tight despite the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign, because the Democrats were going to come into office hopefully next, he was saying to them, and would rescue Iran. And so, Negar, this goes back to what we were just speaking about. Why did Joe Biden appoint Robert Malley? Well, bringing Malley back in is bringing in, again, the Obama officials right back into the Biden administration. And what we saw them do is they immediately reverted back to Obama Iran policy. So some of the first acts they did when the Biden administration came into office, they delisted the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. They immediately stopped enforcing sanctions against Iran, in particular the oil sales to China. And so right now you've got an Iranian regime that is about $100 billion richer than they were when Trump left office. So all of this happens under Robert Malley. And Malley is the one who hired people like Ariana Tabatabaei into office. And she, to this day, holds a very senior level position in the Biden administration, now Department of Defense, and holds very high level security clearance, which is shocking to most of us, and is privy to some of the United States' most high level classified national security information.
You said a lot of interesting things there. Let's break that down. One of the first points you made, are you saying that they brought forward Pezeshkian as a candidate and wanted to support his win potentially because they wanted to have somebody match Donald Trump if he is elected in November?
I think matching Donald Trump in the sense of again putting a pretty face on the Iranian regime, right? Putting something palatable forward to the Trump administration, to President Trump, to the West writ large, somebody who might appear as someone you could potentially negotiate with, someone who might not appear as extremist as the regime actually is. I understand that in Iran, they are already talking about and preparing in some ways for a Trump presidency. And we even saw about a month ago, I saw some reports about a think tank in Iran that was arguing that that the regime needs to figure out how to influence an incoming Trump administration. And then, to my chagrin, I saw not soon after that the Quincy Institute, which is tied to Trita Parsi, which is tied to NIAC, which we know through a law case that came out some years ago through deposition, shows that Trita Parsi is tied back to the Iranian regime. So through this chain, we know that Quincy, has these links to the Islamic Republic. And sadly, people like Vivek Ramaswamy and J.D. Vance spoke at this Quincy Institute conference not too long ago. I'm not sure that those gentlemen are aware of Quincy's ties.
Will it work? If Trump is elected president, is a potential plan like this, like you've laid out, would this actually have an effect?
Negar, I don't think it would have any effect whatsoever. I don't think that an Islamic Republic charm offensive is going to sway President Donald Trump. And you don't have to take my word for it. If you listen to him at the debate that took place, the first presidential debate between President Trump and Joe Biden, when the subject of Iran came up, President Trump very clearly said that he was going to enforce sanctions, and that he also said he's going to retake leadership, that global leadership role that President Trump, I think, exerted so well in office, and really made very clear through his bold actions where the United States stands on Iran issues, on, again, on the Islamic Republic's extremism, and what America's red lines are. We saw that very clearly under President Trump. And so I don't think a charm offensive is going to work.
That's an interesting way to put it, the charm offense. And it's interesting because we saw John Kirby, who's under obviously the Biden administration, recently say that, a Pezeshkian win hasn't made any difference and we're not going to the negotiating table whatsoever. What do you make of that? It seems like there's a change in tone with their Iran policy, with remarks like that, at least.
John Kirby often, I think, says all the right things. And there are others in the administration who will at times say all the right things. But policy stands for itself, and it stands, much louder than words, right? Action is much louder than words. And so what we've seen at the moment with the Biden administration in terms of how they've dealt with the Islamic Republic, I think you can look at Israel's war with Iranian proxies, and then of course for the first time Iran attacks directly from Iranian soil, a direct attack in April we saw against Israel, unprecedented action by the Islamic Republic. Clearly, the Iranian regime seems emboldened under the Biden administration. And, we all saw the reports that Joe Biden was exerting a lot of pressure on Israel not to respond in the way that Prime Minister Netanyahu might have wanted to respond against that kind of aggressive action by the Islamic Republic. And so, those are the things that I think you can look at to understand what Biden's policy has been towards Iran, which is, appeasement, enrichment of the regime, and really emboldening the regime to where we are today, where the regime has now activated all of their proxies, right? We're seeing Hamas activated, Hezbollah activated, the Houthis are activated. We saw Iranian militias in Iraq attack both American assets and Israel, and we've also seen Iranian boots on the ground in Syria. So at this point, Iran has activated all of its proxy networks, completely destabilizing the Middle East, as well as involved in Russia's war in Ukraine. And this is all happening under Joe Biden. So I think that's what, when we look at what is Biden's Iran policy, that is the Biden Iran policy. It is allowing the regime to be so emboldened in this destabilizing and nefarious activity.
And we also just saw American intelligence coming forward and saying that Iran is meddling and influencing the U.S. campus protests as well.
Exactly right, Negar. So yesterday, United States DNI Avril Haines makes a statement saying that the Islamic Republic of Iran is involved in these pro-Hamas activities in the United States and even funding some of these activities. Her statement goes on to say that she doesn't think Americans necessarily know about the Iranian ties. So, I guess these college students are what many are calling useful idiots of the Islamic Republic. So apparently funded by and influenced by the Iranian regime. And also, Negar, if you saw in the statement, Haynes also points to Iranian interference, potential interference in our upcoming 2024 presidential election. So this is serious stuff. I was very happy to see her statement on the record like this. It is things that I myself have spoken about previously, and many of us knew to be true, that there is an Iranian hand in these activities in the United States. And so it behooves the administration to now take action against that as well.
Do you think they will?
If I had to go based on their record so far, sadly, I am not optimistic.
And it's interesting, like the United Nations recent fact-finding mission came out and said that Iran is committing crimes against humanity, that they are intentionally and deliberately shooting at protesters. So when they're that blatant, why do you suppose that they would care or want to shape or form this narrative that we're seeing in the West right now, with Pezeshkian being a reformist or like you said, the charm and the smiley person behind the government in Iran? Why would they care?
I think the Islamic Republic is sometimes underestimated in the West, in the sense that they have our number. They know, they seem to be very good at manipulating Western public opinion, um, and and really understanding how to try to shape events and at minimum shape reaction in the West. And so when they respond to things like UN reports, or when they're again putting out somebody like a Pezeshkian and marketing him to the West as a reformer, is it because they really care what we in the West perceive of them? No, it is not that they care of their self-perception. It is that they understand how to move the needle here. And so it's really a grand manipulation strategy on their part. They are very good at propaganda. Negar, one thing I would love to share with your audience, just on that note a bit. Um, I once did a bit of research on how much the regime spends on their mass media, and it is shocking, Negar. They're spending in the billions on, as an example, Spanish language television and radio, which is broadcast into Latin America. So, this is astounding. You have Iranians on the street who are starving. We have issues in Iran of lack of water resources. The stories of poverty among the Iranian people are so heartbreaking. Stories about people selling their children, people selling their organs. I mean, tremendous poverty, right? And look, we're aware that the regime spends the country's resources lining their own pockets. They take the country's resources, spend it on the nuclear program, and to fund their terror proxy activity. But also, they are spending billions to try to sway public opinion in places like Latin America in Spanish
Why Latin
language.
America in particular?
Well, it's my belief that it's tied into two things. One is their Hezbollah presence in Latin America. The regime has been successful in infiltrating the region. So we know they're in the Hezbollah is in the tri-border area, which is the area that borders this kind of triangle between Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. And so there's all the narco terrorism and that goes on there. But then you've got also the Iranian infiltration of Venezuela, boots on the ground in Venezuela, and I would argue that they have helped destroy another wonderful, vibrant country and economy, and brought it to complete destruction along the lines of what they've done to Lebanon. And so I believe that their effort in Latin America is tied into Hezbollah and all of that, but also because Latin America is at the doorstep of the United States of America.
So it seems that it all goes back to money, power, influence.
Yes, exactly right. And very much the effort to become the supreme hegemon in the Middle East, to push the United States out of the Middle East, to completely minimize and destroy, if they could, the American influence and power in the Middle East, North Africa region, and again, just push out any American influence in that region, and also we know about the growing China, Russia, Iran axis, which seeks to remove the United States as the world's leading global power, and create a multipolar world. So with China and Russia, certainly as those power centers. So those are some of the motivations of the regime.
And Ellie, I have to ask you, as an Iranian American woman, emotionally, how do you feel when you read these headlines and you're watching the news in Western media and you see this narrative emerging like that of Pezeshkian? How does that make you feel?
Negar, I'll tell you, my personal identity definitely, I know, colors the work that I do, in the sense that I was born in Iran and we fled in 1979 because of the rising anti-Semitism under Khomeini. And we came to the United States, and I'm so blessed to have been given refugee status and to grow up here in the U.S. with, all the freedoms and all the rights that I was given. and so privileged to grow up and represent the government of the United States. So what my, on a personal note, how I feel, first of all, my heart is constantly going out to my Iranian sisters and brothers. The human rights abuses that they face on a daily basis, their legitimate right to freedom that they are constantly, daily demanding, the numbers of Iranians who face torture and execution, and you were referring to earlier, the murder of Iranian protesters, people who merely take to peaceful protests in the streets and are met with bullets by regime officials. My heart is constantly going out to my Iranian brothers and sisters, and I always hope that they know that there are many millions of us outside of the country, the diaspora, that stands with them. We are shoulder to shoulder with them, and we're going to always fight for them and for their freedom and for their rights. The other part of my identity, of course, is Jewish, and so knowing that this radical regime tells us every day that they aim to destroy the Jewish state of Israel is something that obviously I can't tolerate. And so that is something that I fight against every day as well. And, I know that just like the Nazis before them are in the dustbin of history, I have no doubt that this Islamic regime will also be in the dustbin of history, but hopefully sooner rather than later. And then my identity as a proud American, understanding again how much the Islamic Republic is a national security threat to the United States, how much they are working day and night to again push us out of the region, but also to try to remove the U.S. as the global leader. And so all of those things, of course, feels like there's a lot of conflict. But in reality, what I know is that the Iranian people are with America and they're with Israel. And they tell me that all the time, Negar. I am contacted by Iranians inside Iran all the time on social media, and they constantly tell me that Iranians stand with America and Iranians stand with Israel. So I'm very hopeful for our future.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. That's Ellie Cohanim who joined us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Negar.
The Eye for Iran podcast series is created by Iran International, the go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.